The stories were told about money, work, happiness, and school, and what they do. If you zoom out far enough, four institutions shape nearly every hour of our lives: the money system, the labor market, our pursuit of happiness, and schooling. This essay weaves the claims you've shared into a single, coherent narrative, checking them against historical and economic evidence, and then ends with pragmatic ways to act on what we learn. 1. Money isn't found, it's issued, and mostly by banks. A useful starting point is to separate real resources, people, skills, energy, land, tech, from money, which is a system of IOUs we use to coordinate those resources. In modern economies, most new money is created when banks make loans. The Bank of England put it bluntly: when a bank grants you a mortgage, it simultaneously creates a deposit in your account, new purchasing power that didn't previously exist as someone else's savings. This isn't a conspiracy, it's how banking works. Constraints are real: capital, regulation, risk, credit demand, and the central bank's interest rate stance. But the textbook money multiplier story is outdated. Because lending creates deposits, reserve quantities don't mechanically limit lending in the way many primers imply. Regulatory capital and profitability matter more. Empirical work from the BIS, the Fed, ECB, and IMF all show that bank capital requirements and funding conditions are binding levers for credit creation. So is money created out of nothing? In accounting terms, yes. A keystroke creates a matching asset, the loan, and liability, your deposit. In economic terms, it's created out of a promise to repay and is constrained by regulation, interest rates, and risk appetite. The practical implication: money is not inherently scarce like gold. The binding scarcity is usually real resources and inflation risk, not the number of banknotes. That's why debates over QE, interest on reserves, and bank windfalls keep returning. They're design choices about who benefits when money is expanded or withdrawn. 2. Scarcity narratives and why poverty persists. If money is a policy-shaped IOU system, then the claim that poverty and inequality are natural deserves scrutiny. The World Inequality Report, 2022 documents striking concentration. The global top 10% capture about 52% of income and own till 76% of wealth. Those shares move with policy, not fate. Taxation, public investment, labor rules, and education access. Thomas Piketty's long-run data show inequality waxes and wanes with institutions and ideas. For example, tax regimes, social insurance, capital regulation, not with some immutable human essence. This is where your thesis bites. If we're taught that money is scarce, then we'll accept policies that keep bargaining power low and competition for wages high. The powerful gain from that acceptance: a disciplined labor supply chasing a resource imagined as permanently scarce. A brief history of happiness, from collective flourishing to private mood. The claim that our modern, intensely individual idea of happiness is relatively new holds up well. In classical thought, happiness mapped to eudaimonia, a life of virtuous activity situated in a community and its roles. It wasn't a private mood, it was a life well lived with and for others. Historians like Darren McMahon argue that the modern belief in personal happiness as an earthly entitlement really crystallized after the 18th century and spread in the 19th-20th centuries. Meanwhile, social capital research, Putnam's Bowling Alone, and the U.S. Surgeon General's 2023 advisory both show rising isolation and its health costs, underscoring how a narrowly individual model of happiness can undermine collective well-being. Your inference that the modern emphasis on individual responsibility and self-optimization makes us easier to manage and less likely to act collectively aligns with these trends. It's not that responsibility is bad, it's that responsibility without solidarity leaves people isolated against structural forces. 4. What schools really do: literacy, skills, and socialization into a nation-state. Is the primary function of school to brainwash? That's too strong as a generalization. but it does capture a real, well-documented function of mass schooling: socialization into prevailing orders. Evidence across 3 layers. Historical cases with militarized aims. Sparta Zagoj removed boys from families at approximately 7 to be raised by the state for military discipline. A stark example of schooling as state formation. The Aztec system, Calmecac Telpac Cali, is often cited as compulsory and universal by sex and class, with training geared to religious, civic, and military roles. The Aztec system, Calmecac Telpac Cali, is often cited as compulsory and universal by sex and class, with training geared to religious, civic, and military roles. Scholars debate the exact scope, but the thrust is early, state-guided mass schooling. Prussia's 1763 General School Regulation introduced compulsory education, a model explicitly linked to building a disciplined, literate citizenry for a modern state. Nation-building and legitimacy political theorists, for example, Benedict Anderson, Ernest Gellner, argue that mass schooling helps produce the imagined community of the nation by standardizing language, stories, and civic rituals. In short, a shared national identity and legitimacy for authority. Even functionalist classics like Durkheim emphasize schools as the site of secondary socialization into a society's common morality, historically intertwined with the nation-state. For example, the Jules Ferry laws in France that made schooling free, compulsory, and secular, with explicit civic aims. Critical perspectives on reproduction. Louis Althusser framed schools as a key ideological state apparatus that reproduces existing relations of production, that is, compliance with the system. Bowles and Gintis argued schools mirror the workplace, hierarchies, bells, external rewards, the correspondence principle. You don't have to accept every claim to see the hidden curriculum is real. Bottom line, schooling does both. It expands literacy and opportunity, and it socializes people into a particular political economic order, including a national identity and respect for authority. Whether you call that civic education or indoctrination depends on your priors, but the institutional function is well attested. Banks manufacture money by extending credit. The scarcity we feel is engineered through policy. Rates, capital rules, fiscal choices, ostensibly to balance inflation and stability. The story that money is inherently scarce keeps workers disciplined and deferential. Poverty and inequality are not immutable. They track policy regimes and ideas that legitimize them, change the rules, change the distribution. Our happiness story shifted from communal flourishing to private mood management. That newer story can fragment solidarity precisely when collective power is needed to renegotiate the rules. Schooling is where these stories get operationalized. For good, shared literacy, civic capacity, and for control, standardization, deference. The first systems of compulsory schooling we point to, Sparta, Aztec, Prussia, were indeed entangled with state power and discipline. 6. What a wiser design might look like. Pragmatic moves. If the goal is to reduce artificial scarcity, rebuild solidarity, and keep the benefits of education without the obedience reflex, here are realistic, evidence-aligned steps. Monetary literacy for citizens. Teach how bank money is created, what central banks actually target, and how fiscal policy interacts with real resource limits. This strips the mystique from "we can't afford it" when the true constraint is inflation and capacity, not keystrokes. Target real scarcities, not nominal ones. Invest where bottlenecks drive inflation: energy grids, housing supply, care work productivity. It's the real economy, not the spreadsheet, that limits prosperity. Institutional fixes for inequality. Choose from a broad mainstream toolbox: progressive taxation tuned to mobility and innovation, automatic stabilizers, child benefits, public health, skills and apprenticeship systems tied to actual labor demand. Rebuild social capital intentionally. Policy can fund the infrastructure of belonging: libraries, third places, local media, civic tech, youth clubs, and the rituals that make neighbors visible to one another. The public health case for connection is now overwhelming. Rehumanize schooling. Keep the civic mission, but reduce the factory logic. More project-based learning, democratic school governance, community service tied to local needs, and assessment that rewards collaboration and curiosity alongside competence. Closing thought. When we're told money is scarce, success is solitary, and school is for sorting, it becomes rational to accept a world of competition and quiet. But once we see how money is issued, how inequality is built, how happiness was once communal, and how schools socialize us, a different rationality opens. Coordinate abundance, shared flourishing, educated agency. None of this denies trade-offs. It simply puts human design choices, not metaphysical scarcity, back at the center of the story. If you'd like, I can turn this into a publish-ready article with charts on bank money creation and inequality trends, plus a sidebar on the Agoge, Kalmikak, Telpok Kali, and Prussian reforms.